Welcome back to Presidents in Politics. I am one of your hosts, Professor McGee, joined with my co-host, former Congressman Ross.
Good morning.
Ulysses S. Grant. This is going to be a fun one today. You know, we got through the rough ones and we're in some fun ones now.
You know, the thing about Ulysses S. Grant is it follows the pattern, with the exception of very few presidents that we've discussed, of just average individuals who have faced terrible situations, who just persevere and suddenly find themselves as President of the United States.
Yes.
And Ulysses S. Grant exemplifies that so well. When you look at him, and born, under the name Hiram Ulysses Grant, it's interesting how his name changed. His father wanted him to go to West Point. He wasn't a big fan of that.
He wanted to be a farmer.
Yeah,
his whole
wanted
life.
to be a farmer.
Always said
Just
that he
wanted
was
to
a
be a
farmer
farmer.
forced to be a soldier.
Yep, came up from meager means. His father gets the congressman to appoint him to West Point, and he shows up and doesn't see a Hiram Grant. He sees a U.S. Grant, and then he starts thinking, and he was a horseman. If they put
master horseman.
Yes. If they put HUG on my saddle, they'll make fun of me. Hug. So he stuck with the U.S. Ulysses S. Grant that they misplaced it there on his
that is correct.
entrance, and for thereafter became known as Ulysses S. Grant with no middle name.
Yes, and he almost missed West Point because of his height.
Yes.
So there's a 5-foot requirement. I don't know if this is still the thing, but there's a 5-foot requirement. He was 5'1". He had 1 inch over the minimum height requirement to go. While he's there, he'll have, I think it's a 6 or 7 inch growth spurt. So he ends up being like 5'7", something like that.
Which was amazing.
Which is amazing.
And when he finishes 21st out of 39 in his class. So he's not a stellar, military strategist. He doesn't really care for it.
No, he says in his autobiography that he feared basically daily that he would flunk out. That he really thought he was going to flunk out of this. I mean, this is what's going through his mind, and yet he will be one of the greatest generals in U.S. history.
Amazing too, because he stays in the Army. He goes out to the Oregon Territory after he gets married to Julia Dent, and they have 2 kids. And he goes out there and just can't stand it. Then they move him down into California, which is worse. And he really can't stand it. They say that's where he started his drinking. And then he finally resigns and comes back.
That's right. And starts selling hats, I believe it was.
Yeah.
I don't know if you heard the story about how his wife, how he proposes to her, because he writes in his autobiography. When they're dating, he's going on a buggy ride with her, and a bridge washed out, and they're going through this washed out ravine, and she was actually really afraid of water. So she looked over at him, they're just dating, and she grabbed his arm and she said, "I'm going to cling to you no matter what." And Grant was very calm. He passes through the water, and he looks over at her and he said, "How would you like to cling to me for life?"
Wow.
And that's his proposal.
I love it.
I mean, that's pretty good. That's pretty smooth.
That's very
pretty smooth. It's pretty good timing, right? It worked out pretty well.
Yes.
And as you said, they get married. They have 2 kids, and for all intents and purposes, they have a pretty happy marriage.
Yes.
What's interesting about Grant is, and especially growing up in the South, right? You always hear about Sherman and the butcher who Grant is, and everyone always looks at Grant as being some kind of harsh butcher. He's actually a gentle soul. In a lot of ways, his father was a tanner, and he cannot stand the sight of blood and watching the hides hanging up. He would do anything else but that, which he was a master horseman, so he would volunteer for the hard work of splitting wood, mucking stalls, taking care of horses. Wow. And one of the reasons why is because he didn't want to work around the blood. So much so that when he was the president, it was said that he would send any steak back that had even a little bit of red in it because he distasted
I did not know that.
the sight of blood, and yet he's one of the greatest generals.
And a very aggressive general. Too.
Very aggressive general.
And what's amazing to me is that here's a guy who goes into business, leaves the Army, goes into business, fails, tries farming, fails, goes into real estate, fails, resorts to going back to Galena, Illinois to work for his father in the tannery. And that's when the Civil War breaks out.
Yes.
And he is asked to put together volunteers.
Yes.
To fight.
And before he even puts those volunteers together, he tries to reapply for his original commission, and he never hears back. That's how unimpressive he was as a soldier.
Yeah.
So like you said, almost everything he does in life, at first he's a failure. And again, we've emphasized this in this podcast so much. But 90%, 99% of being successful in life is just simply showing up and not quitting. You and I had this conversation with a student, actually, right?
Yeah.
Not long ago, we were talking to one of our students who did outstanding. He was nominated for outstanding major, and he asked us why, and we said, you knew how to show up.
Exactly.
Like, half of life is just showing up,
Just
being there on
showing
time,
up.
working hard, and if you do that, you're going to be successful.
You will, and history has proven that. They proved it with Ulysses S. Grant. It was interesting. He fought in the Mexican-American War and thought it was an atrocious. Despised it. He never thought that we should ever been in it, but he said he didn't have the moral courage.
I remember this.
To
He was
say
too
that-
young.
Yeah, he was too young.
Yes.
But he learned from Zachary Taylor and Winfield Scott,
Yes.
both generals that he served under. And then when he got done, he came back and then was, of course, drafted, if you will, to start the volunteers in Illinois. And he wasn't that impressive. He didn't really have much battle experience.
No.
In fact, I think he was a quartermaster during the Mexican-American War.
So he was good at locking guns up.
Exactly, and feeding the troops.
In that time period. In
Yeah.
that time period, he was good at locking guns up.
And then they send him into battle, I guess, in Tennessee, and wins a small skirmish, and then goes to Vicksburg
Yes.
and takes the Confederate stronghold, and that gets everybody's attention.
Yes. And then, of course, legendary for the Battle of Shiloh.
Yes.
That's where it turns, is the Battle of Shiloh for him. And for those who may not have a broad Civil War background, we look back at history, and in the North was more money, more population, more industry, more everything. It would seem like it was a no-brainer they were going to win, but the first few skirmishes, the South actually began taking in huge numbers. The South was more aggressive. It had better leadership. Like, the South is just like crawling the map, and the North actually begins to question if they can win. Lincoln, who's very autocratic in his leadership, is firing generals left and right. I mean, like, he's going through them, and finally he'll find Grant, and Grant has the aggression and the tactics to match Lee. And for the first time, now you got a war.
Yes, and the one
Now you
thing,
got a
his
war.
strategy was attack, attack, attack.
That's right.
Attack.
Yeah.
I mean, you just
And
don't
never
back down.
surrender.
In fact, they say that U.S. Of his name stood for unconditional surrender.
Yes.
You know, because
yes.
he was merciless. He was in it to win it.
Yes.
And that was it.
You know, I remember when I was in martial arts. We used to fight martial arts, and there was an instructor that used to make the statement: "Be careful, because there comes a time in every fight where all rules go out the window." And I think about Grant in that. There were times in fighting where all rules went out the window.
Yep.
Right?
He even said it. There was a quote I just picked out. He said, "In every battle, there comes a time when both sides consider themselves beaten. Then he who continues the attack wins."
I like that.
And that's where I think he really he's shown through. And
I like that.
it was interesting because he had a deep respect for Robert E. Lee.
Yes, they did for each other. It's mutual.
Yes, and I think I remember reading somewhere where he said, you know, what really bothered him is that he had such an able adversary that fought so well and so gallantly, but for a cause so misplaced.
That's right.
And you know, he was not. He was against slavery.
Yes, he
married
was.
into a slavery family. He did not care for it, but he believed in states' rights. But he came at the right time.
Yes, he did.
Which was amazing.
He was
as
a
you
man of
pointed out-
principle.
Yeah, he was very much a man of principle. But as you pointed out, the North was expected to win.
Hands
They
down.
They had the resources. They had the
Manpower, the money,
manpower.
everything.
And yet, the South gave them everything they could.
Yeah, and under the leadership of Lee, it looked like this was a possibility for an unmanned, underfunded, underarmed military to actually win until Grant comes in. Now, one of the things, I've read so much about Grant's tactics, and there's so much written about his tactics, but one of the things that with Grant is he was a master at understanding maps. They would say they could lay a map out in front of him, and he could immediately survey it, and he could tell you what positions could not be defended, what positions were unimportant to defend,
Interesting.
and what positions had to be attacked the strongest. And they said this is what made this is how his mind worked. Because we've talked about this before the show. Every person has their own mental gifts, right? Like we
Right.
all have that. Some people have great processing speed. Some people have great memories. Like he had this great topographical knowledge where he could look at a map and he could very quickly read things. The other thing they said was how calm his mind was. He never got lost in the fog of war. So this is one that I read a lot. And there was one of his generals that he fought with, and he made the statement. He said, "Battle calmed Grant's mind." Like for Grant
Wow.
had that unique ability that when things were going haywire around him, like time slowed down, right? And that's a very unique skill. Most people don't have that.
That's true.
And I think some of that, in all honesty, you're either born with it or you're not.
Yeah.
And Grant was born with one of those intangibles, right? And things would slow. So I thought about this and I read through some. And here were some of the things that throughout all the biographies of Grant that came through that made his military leadership very impressive. His calmness,
Yes.
his perspective, his communication, his courage, and his discernment. And I thought of those 5 things, and I thought that's really the key to good leadership.
It is. And he delegates.
He delegates well.
It delegates and it comes back to haunt him.
In the White House.
Yes, in the White House, because he was very he was loyal to those that he thought were loyal to him.
That's right.
And unfortunately, that comes back to bite him, which we'll talk about.
Yes.
But seeing his ascension is just amazing, because after he takes, Lee's surrender at Appomattox, he then becomes a war hero.
Yes, he does.
Period.
And he's promoted to, what is it, the general of the army, which
Yes,
has only been twice, right?
Yeah, the 4-star general. I think
Yeah,
he was the first
Washington and himself.
Well, yeah, that's true, yeah.
I think are the only two that's ever happened, right?
Yes,
in all
the
of U.S.
brigadiers,
history.
I think, or something. Yes.
Something of that nature.
But then Andrew Johnson realizes that he's got to latch on to him because, well, first of all, Grant's is just absolutely. He was supposed to be at Ford's Theater, and it feels very bad about this whole, very, very, very bad that he wasn't there and felt he could have protected Abraham Lincoln.
That's right.
And Johnson becomes president. Johnson, of course, as we talked about last week, takes on the 10-year of Office Act and fires Seward or Stanton as the Secretary of War. And then in his place, they put Grant. Grant starts to take it, and then Congress says, we want Stanton back in there. So Grant says, fine, I'm out of here.
Drops the keys off at the War Office.
Yes. And Johnson gets just very upset.
Yes, he does.
But it catapults again Grant into a independent, thinking, acting,
yes, he is,
political leader, which then catapults him into the presidency in 1868.
And in the Republican Party, which the first election he voted in, he actually voted Democrat.
I
Interestingly
didn't know
enough.
that. Wow.
I don't know if you've ever read the history of why he didn't actually go to Ford's Theater with Abraham Lincoln that night. Abraham Lincoln wanted him to go, and he was going to go, but Grant's wife could not stand Mary Todd because Mary Todd Lincoln was an odd woman, right?
Yeah.
She gets into the cult. She has a lot of mental issues. Some people said that she was probably schizophrenic. So Grant's wife basically tells him, I'm not going to go to the theater and socialize this woman all night. Get us out of it. So he gets them out of it because of her not wanting to hang out with Mary Todd, and that's the only reason. Now, here's the legend, because this is according to Grant's wife. They were driving out that night anyway around Ford's Theater, but they're going to go see his, I think, daughter. They're going to see like their grown daughter or someone of that nature. And a veiled rider runs up and like pulls the window out and stares in the coach. And later, Grant's wife swore that was John Wilkes Booth.
Wow.
Because John Wilkes Booth originally wanted to assassinate, as you know, the president, vice president, Grant, and the Secretary of State. He wanted to decapitate the Union. So a lot of people wonder if he lost the nerve to kill Grant because he was more interested in killing Lincoln. We don't know. It's one of those great mysteries of history.
I did not know that.
Right? It's one of those just great mysteries of history. But yeah, it was all basically social drama that kept Grant from being there.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And you look at him, and 12 years before he became president, he was a failed farmer.
Failed hat salesman.
Failed at everything.
Yes.
And here he was, 12 years after that, he becomes president of the United States.
Yes.
Now, if that is not an example of perseverance, of American success, then I don't know what is. And that's what I think needs to be taken from these podcasts that we're offering.
Agreed.
Is that please understand that these people that we speak of as our former presidents are no greater or lesser than you.
That's right.
They are just more persistent. Yes, it's a question of opportunity, and timing is everything. But because of their persistence, they end up prevailing.
That's right.
Not all of them are good. We know that. And I think your analogy between great and good is very appropriate, because we've had great presidents in this country come about at a very important time, and Grant is one of them.
Yes.
Because here it is, Reconstruction. Lincoln has been assassinated. Johnson has been impeached and has been thrown out of his party, essentially. Grant comes in and starts to protect the southern states, and especially starts to protect the African Americans,
That's right.
the freed slaves.
That's right.
And he signs into law a bill against the Ku Klux Klan.
That's right. 1871.
He promotes the 15th Amendment. He's doing all he can in order to facilitate, the true reconstruction of the South. And unfortunately, America, as America goes, lets it go for a while when he sends federal troops down there to protect the former slaves and to protect the new found governments. And then finally, I think the American public says, haven't we sent enough troops? And in his second term, it really starts going south. For bad expression there, I apologize. But as far as the American protection, and then we go through that period, all the way up to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that really has shaken our country. But again, we survived it.
That's right.
And a person like Grant came about at the right time. Imagine if it had been somebody else who sought retribution against the South. You know, Grant went out there and he gave leniency. He gave pardons to the Confederate soldiers.
Right.
He wanted them, like Lincoln wanted them, to rebuild and come back into the nation.
Let them up easy.
Yeah, I mean, he did the Greenback Act, and you know, to reinstate the Union currency. You know, he was doing everything he could to bring the nation back together.
One of the things I think that makes Grant unique is not only was he a great man, but he was honestly a good man.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of people that have both. Like, as we look at the presidents, like Andrew Jackson, he was a great man. He was not a good man.
No, you're right.
And what made Grant really, really unique is he was great. He's this powerful military commander, and he was good. He honestly desired to see America be unified. If that was freed slaves, if that was Native Americans, he tries to pass a lot of acts to help the Native Americans.
He does, and coincidentally, it's Custer's last stand that happens during his administration,
which
where everybody
just
thinks
soured public opinion.
yeah.
Had it not been for that, he probably could have
done a more peaceful, transition with the American Indian.
Yeah, when Custer, I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, but when Custer is finally killed, which Custer, you know, Custer had some poor military tactics, right? Like, I know we're kind of getting off topic here.
Okay,
right?
You're the historian. I'm with you. I hang on when you start talking. Let's go.
But Custer had a serious authority problem. He had actually been a general in the Civil War. He was the youngest general we ever had. They called him the boy general. He kept getting demoted because of his problem with authority. At one point during a Civil War battle, he actually left the field to go have supper with his wife because she was in town without telling anyone.
Wow.
Gets bumped for ranks for that. He's very vain. He had that long blonde hair, and he would take cinnamon oil and he would rub it through his hair because he wanted to be shiny to smell good. So he's this odd guy, right? But by the time Little Bighorn rolls around, he's a colonel. So he's been bumped down again. He's no longer a general. But he's reckless, and that's the reason why they keep hiring him, because he's really good at what he does. They called it Custer's luck, because I don't know how many, like 6 horses got shot off underneath him in the Civil War, and he never gets a scratch on him. So he's sent in here. He's told to wait, to hold ground and to wait. He doesn't do that. He marches in. He's way outnumbered. He's got generals on the back, or I guess not generals because he's only a colonel. I guess lieutenants, any officers at the back that are supposed to come in and flank the Native Americans. They know how outnumbered they are. So his subordinates abandon him and go get drunk. And then Custer and his men get slaughtered. Now, not only do they get slaughtered, the Native Americans ritualistically raid the bodies.
Oh, wow.
So they strip the bodies, they cut out his eyes, they put sticks through his eardrums. I won't go into what else they do. And they completely ravage the bodies. So when this gets back to the American people, they start using the term savages. You know, they're ripping out eyeballs and piercing eardrums and other things. And because of this, we've got to have full retribution on the Native Americans. And in many ways, Custer's last stand did exactly what he thought it would do, just not the way he wanted it. Like, it did defeat the Native Americans, but it was through his very painful death.
Yeah, it became an appalling event that rallied the American people. And unfortunately, Grant has been very successful with the American Indians until that time.
Had it not been for this last stand, had it not been for this, Grant, as you said, probably could have had this handled a lot more peacefully. But Custer was impetuous in everything he ever did.
Wow.
And it cost a lot of people.
You know, as we talk about Grant and the way he would delegate, this is one thing that I think is very important in leadership. Grant delegated a lot to his cabinet.
Yes,
and
too
it
much.
got him in trouble.
Yes.
You know, it got him into they had the panic of what was it,
1875.
What was it?
Panic
Okay,
1875.
And you know, these guys were buying up gold and trying to subvert the markets. He had the whiskey ring. He had the kickbacks on the railroad, the Union Pacific Railroad. I mean, everything's going wrong, and it even goes so far up to his secretary. And he's just he is innocent. He is without knowledge. But yet he had delegated these people the authority to do what is necessary. And I think what's brilliant about him is that even though he delegated the authority, he never delegated the responsibility. He took responsibility. And that's the mark of a great leader.
I agree.
You have to delegate in order to get things done, but you never delegate the responsibility.
Right.
You are ultimately responsible for the delegation of that authority you have given to your subordinates. And he proved that to his own detriment. But yet, despite the scandals in his office, he was revered.
Yes.
You know, after he served his 2 terms, he went out. I think he was accepted by the Queen of England. I think the Bismarck in Germany.
He goes to China. He goes to India.
Japan. The emperor takes him in. They're just making this tour all around the world. They just think the world of him.
They think he is. I mean, he is the world celebrity at the time.
Yes.
He was an ardent cigar smoker. Loved cigars so much so that it said that after the Civil War and the conclusion of the Civil War, that the American people sent him over 10,000 cigars. And one biographer said, and he tried to see how fast he could smoke them up. I mean, he was smoking, I think the average was 20 cigars a day is what he smoked. And of course, he will die of throat cancer. But he was averaging about 20 cigars a day. On this world tour, a lot of the royalty will give him cigars and pipes and tobacco and all this, but they'll also give him a lot of other world treasures. However, as you know, when he comes back, his son promises him that they're going to be able to make some money because he doesn't get his pension as general.
Right.
They don't give that to him. There is no pension for president yet.
Correct.
He's never been successful in any other business. So he comes back and his son says,
and he's lived an opulent life as president. He has redone the White House.
Yes.
They've had state dinners there with 29 courses, French wines, everything.
Right.
He's gotten used to a lifestyle.
And 20 cigars a day. That's not cheap.
Yes. And you got a wife who's gotten used to it too. So
yes.
Okay, honey, we're no longer here. How do we maintain our lifestyle?
Yes. So the son comes up with this, what was it called? The Grant and Ward.
Yeah, Grant and Ward
Investment Company. Well, Ward is a con man.
Yeah.
And it's a Ponzi scheme. And they lose literally everything. And now Grant is penniless.
He sold off all his memorabilia from the Civil War in order to pay these people back. Again, he feels responsible because he talked others into investing with him. Which,
by the way, I don't know if you know this or not. But again, as we look at
history, I love this.
P.T. Barnum, who, Big Top Circus, multi-million.
Suckers Born Every Minute.
Suckers Born Every Minute. They did the movie, The Greatest Showman, right? So P.T. Barnum, this colossal empire of money, actually offered Grant to lease out the memorabilia to set up a circus attraction for it. He would pay Grant $100,000 and a percentage of the gate fee to help him get out of debt. Grant said, as nice as that sounds, I will not be a man who carries debt. And he sells that back to Vanderbilt, who loaned him the money. So here is Grant, and he had a way out, but his ethics would not allow him to take it. Here's P.T. Barnum saying, we'll use all your memorabilia and make this big show about you. And Grant said, no, I owe all this money over here to Vanderbilt. I'm going to repay Vanderbilt first.
Wow.
Yes.
That's
the character that Grant had.
That is a strong character.
Yes.
And it didn't matter if he failed or not. He wasn't going to change his character.
That's right. He was going to die poor with a good. It reminds me of the book of Proverbs, that there's nothing better than a good name. The good name is to be revered more than riches, is what the book of Proverbs says. And I love that about him. Now, as he gets older, he was smoking 20 cigars a day, averaging, chewed, smoked pipe tobacco, and drank like a fish.
Yeah.
So that combination...
Yeah, that might affect your life expectancy.
It has a way of catching up with you. So most medical doctors believe that he got cancer of the mouth first. And again, was it the heavy smoking? Was it the heavy drinking? Was it the combination of both? We don't know. But he gets cancer of the mouth. It moves down to his throat. He knows he is very poor. He doesn't want to leave his wife in abject poverty. So a magazine offers him something measly, like $25,000 to write his memoirs. He thinks he's going to have to take it so his wife doesn't die poor. I don't know if you know the story either or not. And then a little guy who you probably know by the name of Mark Twain comes to him and says, I'll help you write your autobiography, get out of that deal, and then all of this money can go to your widow. Grant, at this point, is hurting so bad that he would say to drink water was like swallowing melted metal, like molten.
Oh.
He basically, just by sheer willpower, props himself up. His neck starts swelling from the cancer. So he wears a scarf all the time. He has several hemorrhages where the veins and arteries start popping. He'll have to cough blood up. And he'll sit there with Twain and with others, and he'll start writing out his autobiography in excruciating pain. So much so that at the end of the book, he can't even speak anymore. He would write notes out and pass it to Twain and others as he's concluding this book. He'll die 5 days, roughly, after finishing this.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And his wife will end up making something, I think it was something like $500,000 at the time. So just out of sheer willpower, he is determined that he is going to leave his family better off. This is Grant. This is the guy that he was. That just smaller, quiet, gentle strength, and you will not shake him.
You're right. And he wasn't head of his class in school.
No, he's barely.
He wasn't well educated. He wasn't. A good businessman.
No.
You're right. It was sheer will.
Just sheer will.
And that is
just
an
determination.
Amazing determination.
I remember one of my favorite stories. I was reading through one of his but one of the other biographers that had written about him, and they said he was this master horseman. Of course, that's what he was known for. He loved horses. He worked with horses. The cavalry said he was one of the best riders they ever had. So when he becomes president, he never lost that love of riding fast. And there's actually the story told. I haven't found historical records, but I found it in multiple biographies where, as president, because again, there's no Secret Service yet. It's kind of happening after Lincoln, but they still don't have it definitive yet. So the presidents would just like ride around their own. So he actually ran through downtown D.C. in his carriage so quickly that he got a ticket. Because of his reckless driving, they gave him a $20 ticket, and Grant didn't pull the president card. He went to the office and he paid the $20.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
That's a man of character.
He was a man of character. He wanted to dot the I's and cross the T's and live. There's in the New Testament, it talks about spiritual leaders, and there's this term that I love, and it says the spiritual leaders are to live above reproach. Mm-hmm. And I like that. Grant was a man who lived above reproach.
I wish we could see that today in some of our leaders.
When was the
if
last
not all
time
of
we
the
saw
leaders.
a politician who lived above reproach?
I agree with you. You know, and I think that's, and again, one of the important things about these podcasts is for us to learn not only the history of these men, but the history of our country, of how these leaders have lived their lives. You know, through agony, through failure, but yet through persistence and, as you said, sheer will.
Yes.
And that has made us different. That may be the basis of American exceptionalism.
Yes.
Who knows?
Yes. And he is a man of faith. I know we say this every time. I'm a bivocational pastor, so I always harp on this, but he's a man of faith. Yeah. His wife is very devout Methodist.
Yes.
He doesn't get baptized till actually getting close to his deathbed. Reverend Philip Newman will come and baptize him on his deathbed. Grant said he was always leery of established religion, but daily he was in the Word of God and prayer, spending time and communing with God. Yes. Why was he a man of character? Why did he have this perseverance? I personally believe it was his faith. Yeah. It was that faith in Jesus Christ that allowed him to be this type of man.
It's amazing.
No,
go ahead.
Upon his death, Robert E. Lee, because again they have this mutual respect. I don't know if I'm taking what you were going to read. Lee made this statement, and I love this. Lee said upon his death, "I have carefully searched the military records of both ancient and modern history, and I've never found Grant superior as a general."
Wow.
That's not coming from your friend.
No.
That's coming from your enemy.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's amazing. And, you know, I just think that here's a guy, and to share another quote with you, because I think this is what's really... Grant took all the... When he failed, he didn't give up, and then suddenly he's president. I mean, he wins the Civil War. He goes through all this, but what he says is that the friend in my adversity I shall always cherish most. I can better trust those who have helped to relieve the gloom of my dark hours than those who are so ready to enjoy with me the sunshine of my prosperity.
I like that.
And that's where I think,
like that.
you know, but that's reality.
Yes.
And I can tell you that, you know, having been in an elected office, both in the state and the federal Congress, you all of a sudden have all these friends. They want to share your sunshine with you because you've been elected and you have this title.
It's when your pockets are full at happy hour, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's those times when you're in adversity that those who stand by you are truly your friends. And Grant recognized that. And I think, you know, it was by the grace of God that we had him and that he was able to provide for his family at the end, which was amazing.
I like that, those who stand with him in adversity. It makes me think, again, my mind just thinks of the Old Testament. It makes me think of the Old Testament with King David and when he was on the run and he was held up in the cave of Adullam.
Yes.
And it talks about the men, and the Hebrew is basically the riffraff came to him. And he sets these guys up as his leaders. And several years later when he goes to the palace, it's those guys he puts in position of power now. It was the riffraff who stood with him in the cave, exactly, that then could rule with him in the palace. And there's some spiritual principles there.
I agree with you.
There's something to be said that if you stand with people in the dark, that's where promotion and the light comes from.
You know, when Grant passes away, and they do, I think it was a 7-mile funeral procession, 7 mile long, and they took up private donations of $600,000 and built him a mausoleum.
Yes.
His family a mausoleum.
Yes.
Which I think is the largest in America, I guess.
It's on, what is it, Hudson Bay? No.
It's somewhere in Manhattan.
Yes.
And Riverside Drive. Yeah.
Somewhere around there.
But it's really just phenomenal that the country came together for him at that time and his family.
Probably the only other thing to that sheer magnitude would be the Lincoln Memorial, right?
Absolutely.
That's about the only other prize you can think of for the sheer magnitude of would be like the Lincoln Memorial.
And what would have been his 75th birthday is when they dedicated that mausoleum. And, and you know, he was the youngest president at the time at 46.
And then I think he'll be beaten by Teddy Roosevelt when he steps in as vice president. I think he'll be the next youngest.
Amazing history. You know, I just think, again, that knowing the character of these people is the important thing. Even those transitional ones that we talked about for that 20-year period from Andrew Jackson to Abraham Lincoln were necessary, weren't exceptional in their own right, but yet were able to transition this country, sometimes for bad, but only brought us to good ultimately.
Right. And as we talked about, sometimes they were merely the black velvet to help the diamond shine, right?
Well put.
Sometimes it was that stretch, the black velvet, and then there was a Lincoln and there was a Grant. They were the settings for the stones. So I think we have probably met our time.
Yeah.
But man, Grant, Lincoln, we could go on
you're right.
for such a long period of time. And then it's going to go downhill again a little bit.
Yep, we got another about 20, 30 years where we go through some other...
The forgotten presidents, right?
Yeah.
But
one thing I just want to say real quickly about Grant that I thought was interesting is that he wanted to annex the Dominican Republic.
That's right.
In order to have protect a passageway between a canal being built between the Atlantic and the Pacific.
It was called Santo Domingo at the time?
Yes, Santo Domingo.
And he also thought it could be free land given to the freed slaves.
Yes.
Again, that heart, he had this big heart for people.
And, what would happen if that was now a U.S. territory? And I mean, we have Puerto Rico down there, so...
Right.
But that Puerto Rico came a long time after that.
I think one way to sum him up, there's a biographer I read who made this. I thought it was really good. That Grant's biggest weakness was his goodness, in the sense that he was such a good man that he thought other men were as good as he was.
Yeah, that's powerful.
I think you could if his cabinet was just simply as moral and ethical and as good as he was, there wouldn't have been no issues. He just looked at other people with his lens. It almost reminds you of the Old Testament term, there was no guile in him. Yeah. He had no guile in him, so when he looked at other people, he expected that out of them, and yet they just used him for the power.
Amazing.
So this has been the life of Ulysses S. Grant, one of probably the finest presidents, the 18th president. Good and great.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.